think for most of us, it is so much harder to see somebody who you love or respect or care about in severe emotional distress than it is to deal with our own emotional distress. There's something much more like helpless and powerless about it when it's somebody else. And it brings up a different level of distress for us to see somebody else going through something difficult than it does when it's our own challenges. Because it brings up this extra layer of distress, we often momentarily seem to forget what we know about healthy, effective coping tools and revert to very basic and often maladaptive or unhelpful coping mechanisms when we are trying to be a support person for somebody else. My theory is that because it brings up a different type of distress in you when someone you care about is suffering, it causes you to want to shortcut what you generally know to be the healthier adaptive ways of dealing with the situation. And instead, our natural instinct seems to be to say or do things that we hope will simply command the unpleasant emotion in the other person to disappear as quickly as possible so that they can go back to normal, so that we can go back to normal, and so that everybody can just go back to life the way it was before this problem came up. The problem is that when we apply these overgeneralized and oversimplified coping techniques to someone else who is struggling, it at best does not help. And at worst, actually makes them feel worse. Because when someone's really going through something difficult, like hopelessness or trauma or grief, most people understand that if they reach out to you for support and they let you in, let you know what's going on for them, they know you can't fix it. All but the most unreasonable of people understand you don't have a magic solution to their problem. There's nothing you can do that's going to force or command their pain to go away. They don't want that from you and they don't expect that from you. They usually just want to feel less alone and a little bit more understood. The problem is that when we apply these oversimplified strategies or say these really cliche general things that aren't even necessarily true, what we're actually communicating to that person is, you are alone and I don't get it. And this is tragic because we do get it for the most part. There are differences from one person to the next, to be sure. But there's not a human being alive who's 20 years old or more who doesn't understand grief, who has never felt crippling anxiety in at least some situation, who doesn't understand what it's like to feel hopeless or powerless. Some of us feel those things much more often than others. Some of us feel those things much more intensely than others. But we all kind of get it to some degree. There are certain emotions and certain experiences that are pretty universal to being a human being in kind of a messed up world. But we miss so many opportunities for connection and understanding when we cannot tolerate the emotional distress we experience inside when someone else is going through their own emotional distress. Today, we're going to review some alternatives to some commonly used responses to a person who is struggling, really don't help and actually probably drive a wedge between you and them and inadvertently make things worse. My assumption here is that most people applying these techniques have their hearts in the right place, genuinely want to help, and simply don't know how to use the techniques they already understand to help another person. And today we're going to try to bridge that gap. So, really quick, the first thing that I want to emphasize here is we need to get out of black and white thought patterns. What I mean by that is it can often feel like, if someone else is seeing things in an unrealistically pessimistic or hopeless manner, or at least it looks unrealistic to you, it's really normal to want to just like snap them back to reality and get them out of this thought process that you, as this external third party observer, can see is not completely in line with reality. But when I say avoid these, feel good, like toxic positivity, overly cliched statements, please understand that that doesn't mean you have to just like blindly agree with them and say, yeah, your life sucks. Everything is hopeless. We're screwed. Let's all just sit around and cry about it or be angry about it. Both of those would be extreme ends of a continuum, right? Those are extreme responses. And actually, what we're aiming for is probably the midpoint between those two things. So if you can literally visualize what would the midpoint between like everything's going to be fine and this sucks and always will, like what's the middle? That is generally the point what we're aiming for. The first response that I want to target, probably one of the most common ones, and I think most of us, as soon as we say it, as soon as these words leave our mouths or our phones or whatever, we're like, I know that was stupid and didn't help, but it's such a normal thing to say, is it gets better. The problem with saying it gets better, well, actually, there's a couple problems with saying it gets better. One is we don't know. It's a prediction of the future. So this person, the person who's struggling, is projecting a future, right? And they're projecting hopelessness and pessimism and despair, and they're saying, I think things are just going to keep getting worse. And if you say it gets better, you're just doing the same thing that they are, but in the opposite direction. Saying it gets better or it will never get better are ultimately both just baseless predictions. Nobody actually knows what the future holds. And when you say it gets better to someone who's in a hopeless place, you're basically just telling them your feelings are wrong, you're completely alone, I don't understand what it's like to be where you are, and just suck it up and get over it. This is not helpful. And it's also an example of what we call magical thinking. You don't actually know that their life is going to get better. You don't know that their situation is going to improve. You just want them to believe that so that their bad feeling goes away, so that your corresponding feeling goes away. So that's why it gets better is ultimately an unhelpful statement. A better response, and obviously I talk like a therapist, so I might use very unnatural phrasing for things. Feel free, you don't have to copy my answers word for word, but feel free to say this like a normal person and not a therapist. But when you notice an urge to respond to somebody who's struggling with the phrase, it gets better, maybe say something like, whenever you're ready, I'll try to help you make this better. There's two really important distinctions here. Number one is you are not rushing the person. When we're going through something really difficult, sometimes we want or need to be upset for a little bit. I know that's hard for you as a support person because you just want to make it better as quickly as possible. Whether this is your best friend, your partner, your kid, your mom, whoever it is, you just want them to be okay. Of course you do. And that's the most natural thing in the world, but you can't rush it. Sometimes we need to be mad for a while. Sometimes we need to be sad for a while. Sometimes we need to be scared for a while. Unpleasant emotions are not bad. We need to sit with these things. We need to work through them. It's healthy to experience them and it's healthy to express them. So we don't want to rush people through them. That actually tends to prolong the emotion because they feel misunderstood and they feel like, well, now I still feel like crap, but now I know that you, important person in my life, do not understand my feeling and think I can just snap out of it, and it's probably going to extend that feeling for even longer. The other thing that you're emphasizing, if you say something like this, is not only do I care and do I want you to feel better, I'm actually willing to walk with you on this journey. When you say it gets better, you're basically taking yourself out of the equation. That's probably not your intent. I'm sure that if you're having this conversation with this person, you are willing to help them find a way to make it better. But that doesn't actually get communicated with this sort of just cliche positive statement. So by emphasizing the idea that I want to help you make it better, I will work with you on figuring out what we need to do differently, what needs to change about your life, what needs to look different. You are not alone in this journey. We will be side by side coming out of this because I know what it's like and I've been there too, and we're going to walk out of this thing together. So something along the lines of that, I think is going to be a much better replacement for it gets better. The second thing I want you to consider not saying anymore is everything happens for a reason. First, I want you to consider whether you even believe that or not. If you don't believe it, don't say it. Like, never, I know it's easier said than done. Try to never say anything to a person who is in despair that you do not personally believe, because they can tell. Like, you would know if someone said that to you and they didn't believe it and you didn't believe it, you'd both know and it wouldn't do anything, right? Now, here's the thing. Even if you do believe it, maybe you have a worldview or a spiritual belief system where you legitimately do believe everything happens for a reason. That's fine. You're allowed to believe that. But would you want to hear that in the middle of your darkest times? Because again, it kind of goes back to rushing. Like, this is meant to be a reassuring statement, and there is reassurance within it. But to say it to a person who's enraged or who's crying, I feel like there's again a sense of urgency there. Like there's an unspoken, this is going to be fine eventually. So, like, let's just shortcut that and be fine now. And again, people do not like to be rushed through their feelings. B, it's not even really possible. Like, imagine if you were with your best friend and they broke their arm. and like a minute ago they broke their arm and they're like in severe pain and agony and they're like, oh, this is awful. I don't actually know what people say when they break their arm. And you say, well, 6 months from now it's going to be fine, so like let's just not worry about it. Like it doesn't, that may be true. There may be some moment in the future where this person looks back on this pain they're experiencing now and says, oh, I get it, I get why this happened. But that doesn't do them any good right now. The potential promise of the lack of pain around this experience in the future does not negate the pain that they are actually experiencing in the present moment. It's still real, it's still there. It may not be there forever. You might be looking at this and saying, like, someday you're going to get this. Someday this is going to be good in your life. Maybe that doesn't do them any good right now. So instead of saying everything happens for a reason, I might say something along the lines of, no matter how it feels, I want you to know that you aren't alone. Again, most people in the midst of a really, really dark time in their life are not looking for like a one-liner that you can say that just takes their pain away. They know that's not real. They know that's not a realistic thing to expect from you. They just want to know that they're not alone. And when you say something like everything happens for a reason, you are essentially communicating to them that you're alone because you're showing them that you don't get it, even if you do. And if you can just show them, I get it, or I get something like it, I've been through something like this, or even if you haven't, like, no matter what this looks like for you, I just want you to know I'm a support person for you in this. I'm not going anywhere. Take as long as you need. This hurts. It's going to hurt for a while from the looks of it, but I'll be around for it. We can always talk about it. If you ever want a distraction, we can go spend some time together, do something else. It's really just about letting them know that they are not sitting in their despair alone. Because the only thing worse than hopelessness is hopelessness combined with isolation. That's a special kind of misery. The third statement that I want you to consider replacing is, it could be so much worse. This one is really tricky because it's almost always true to some degree. The person who you are talking to probably does not have literally the hardest life in the world. And they almost certainly do have some amount of good things in their life. And so this one isn't even that it's factually incorrect like some of the other ones are. It's just that it is irrelevant. The reason it's irrelevant is emotional pain is essentially caused, at least in my belief, by the gap between a person's desires or expectations and the circumstances that they're actually experiencing in the current moment. That's why emotional pain is so subjective and depends so much on a person's upbringing and experiences up until that point. What is your context for suffering? A person's pain who has had a relatively good or easy life is just as real as a person who has had an objectively much harder life. And so imparting your context onto somebody else's life does not negate their pain, because just knowing that your context exists does not make it become theirs. Their most painful experience is their most painful experience. And that experience essentially forms the anchor point of their emotional pain scale. So if I have my air conditioning on my car and my dishwasher and my furnace all break, I don't know why I'd be worried about air conditioning and furnace in the same week, but whatever. All three of those things break in the same week. That's a hard week, right? Objectively, most people would say, well, that's kind of a lot. That's going to be expensive. That sucks, Scott. If the person who I am venting to about these things is a refugee from a war-torn country, those problems probably seem minimal to them. They might never have even had those things I am used to having and do not currently have. So to them, they might hear that and be like, that's not really a big deal, man. Like, I've never had any of those things for my entire life. You haven't had them for like 3 days. Get over it. But to me, who is used to having those things, there's now going to be a gap between my normal life and my expectations and my current situation. That does not make my pain less real. Just because I've had luxuries and conveniences that other people do not experience doesn't mean I don't feel pain when I lose those things. And this is true that this could be a much bigger topic, but I think we do such a poor job of recognizing that everybody's pain is real. And the pain of someone who's had a very privileged upbringing is not lesser just because they have not had a super hard life on like the grand scale of all 8 billion people. Everybody's life has something good in it, no matter what circumstances they're facing. There's always a next level to pain. There's always some level you can identify that would be worse than the current level. Saying all those things to somebody else doesn't take their pain away. It basically just makes them feel like you think they're being a drama queen. And as is the common trend among all of these well meaning but unhelpful statements, it just makes them feel alone. It makes them feel like they're the only person in the world who understands themselves. It makes them feel like their pain is somehow less than or different. And it creates this massive isolation that, based on the success of this channel, I think so many people experience. And I think it's so artificial. I think so much of it is caused by us just not knowing how to sit with someone in distress or not knowing how to cope with the distress it brings up for us when they are struggling. And so we say and do things that make them think they're alone and they're not. And this is such a prime example of that. So instead of saying it could be so much worse, consider saying something like, I'm so sorry you're going through this right now. I just want you to know I'm here for you. Again, you're not trying to command their pain to disappear. You're not trying to act like you have some magic bullet solution to their problems. You're letting them know, I see your pain. It's real to me. You're not alone. That's all they need. That really is all people need, like 95% of the time. I promise you. The fourth statement that is generally unhelpful to make to someone who's going through a really difficult time is just go for a walk, or just get a job, or just go do X thing that will make your situation better. This again is a little bit like the one we just discussed in that those things technically might help under certain circumstances. Like going for a walk is generally a good thing to do for our stress or for our mental health. So it's not that these are objectively bad ideas. It's simply that they tend to be a little bit tone deaf to where the person is at right now. Reviewing a couple themes we've discussed already in this video, people don't like to be rushed through their pain. And you as the observer, like when you're trying to basically like let's solve this right here and right now, what you're essentially telling that person is your pain is an inconvenience to me. This is a trifling matter, and I just want to be done with it as quick as possible. Your emotions and your distress aren't really valuable to me. They're a problem to be solved, and I want to find the fastest way to solve the problem. And I think it would be if you took XYZ healthy, effective action, which may in fact be a good thing to do. But don't rush to encouraging the action step. Do not rush a person through their pain. It is not helpful. They need to experience it. They need to connect with you on it. They need to be able to express it. And they need to be able to do that without being commanded to do a thing right away. Another thing to consider is when people are experiencing emotional pain or distress or suffering, energy, motivation, drive, self care, these things are often very low. They're really low when we're frustrated, disappointed, grieving. We tend to lose access to these things for a while. So instead of just telling them what to do, I might say something like, do you want to go for a walk with me? Because again, now we're saying rather than like, you go fix this problem ASAP, you're communicating that you're there for them and you're communicating that you want to, and I don't mean this literally, the walk is just a metaphor or it was an example, that you're on this walk with them, that they are not sitting in their grief by themselves, that they are not sitting in their anger by themselves, that you are willing to be a partner with them in walking out of this distress. And that is so much more powerful than just telling them what to do that you think will solve the problem. So, the four examples I've given you so far today of well meaning but unhelpful statements are four of many. And I could certainly keep going and give you example upon example upon example. The truth is, they all end up being variations on a theme because they all have a few things in common. We're rushing people, we're invalidating them, and we're missing opportunities to connect or show that we understand or show that we care. And so rather than making this an exhaustive list of every possible thing you could say and everything I want you to say instead, I think you guys probably get the point by now. So here's what I want to end with for today. There's a little bit of a plot twist to this whole video. I've been framing everything so far as say this instead of that to another person. And hopefully in hearing this, whether you've been Whether you're hearing this as someone who's more of a support person and is trying to figure out how to better help someone else in your life, or if you're the person who's often struggling and you want someone else in your life to understand these things so that they can better support you, there's a whole nother level to this that I want you to consider, which is unhelpful statements that we've reviewed so far in this video and the general themes that they cover. Do you ever say those things to yourself? Because I've been framing this as these are unhelpful if you say them to another person. The truth is, they're just as bad if they come from you to you. Your inner monologue or dialogue, whatever it may be, that's the voice you hear the most often. And if it's the critical, not understanding, invalidating, shaming voice, that's going to have just as big a negative impact on you as it would if it were someone else's voice. In fact, I would even go so far as to say it may have a bigger negative impact on you than it would if it was someone else. If for no other reason than sheer volume. You're in your head 24/7 and you can never get away from your own inner monologue. So if it's a negative one, you have this person in your head all day long saying these unhelpful things to you. So I would encourage you to not just think about this from the lens of how can I be a better support person to other people, but I want you to also use the tools we talked about in this video to try to be a better support person to yourself. Because if there is one person in this world who should be able to communicate understanding and validation and empathy to you, it is you. Person who knows your whole backstory, who knows the whole context, who knows all the inner thoughts that you never spoke to anybody else, but that help you understand your own reactions. You have access to all that. And you can either use that information to support and encourage and help yourself, or you can use it to beat yourself down, insult yourself, and shame yourself. I hope that you choose the former because it's going to take you in a much better direction in your mental health journey. I hope this helps, and I'll see you next time. Take care.